Hi, everyone. Okay, before we get started, I just want to say that there is going to be a lot of Spanish names, old Spanish names in this video, and I'm probably going to brutalize those names. So just hang with me, correct me in the comments, and let's get started. So, the most powerful advertisement of all wasn't a brochure or a book, it was the penny postcard. Postcards collecting had reached enormous proportions in the United States by 1905, and the years from 1907 to 1915 are now called the golden age of postcards. Two changes lit the fuse creating this particular age. In 1898, Congress let private publishers print cards and dropped the postage to a penny. Then in 1907, the post office allowed the divided back, message on the left, address on the right, which freed the entire front of the card for a single full image. Suddenly, every postcard was a tiny billboard. And the volume is almost hard to believe. At the peak, the Postal Service estimated 1 billion penny postcards were mailed every year. In 1909 alone, 969 million cards were mailed. For Florida, this was free advertising at impossible scales. Every tourist who mailed home a card of a pier full of fish or a day's tarpon catch laid out on a dock or an image of almost anything amazing was doing the railroad's marketing for it, one nickel's worth of bragging at a time. The State Archives of Florida still has a lot of these postcards. A color card captioned Fishing in the Atlantic Ocean, End of Pier, Daytona Beach from around 1920, another showing a day's tarpon catch from about 1909. There's all different types of these cards. Of course, this is the one that we're going to be talking about today. Look at all those fish. Absolutely amazing and such a fantastic advertisement. So these cards traveled into living rooms in Ohio, New York, Pennsylvania, planting the same image over and over: warm water, big fish, land, sunshine, easy escape from winter. The postcard boom did not last long. New tariffs, a dip in card quality, and a wartime shortage of German printing ink cooled the craze after 1915, and publishers shifted toward the white border view cards aimed squarely at tourists. But the formula was set. Florida had been printed, mailed, and penned into scrapbooks as America's fishing paradise. I'm Beth Perdue, your storyteller for today, and this is Forgotten Threads. The starting point for this video is a vintage Tichnor Brothers postcard titled 2-Hour Catch of Kingfish, card number 250. You can see that. You've got 250 and very tiny writing across the top. And of course, what this was. On the back side is going to tell you the publisher who created this, or the printer who created this. Based on research, including a catalog copy in the Hampton Dune collection of Florida postcards, the scene is identified as near Sarasota, Florida. You can see this bridge in the background, with an original image date of around 1930, though this particular printing likely dates to the late 30s through early 50s. There's not really a good estimate on it, and it's based on the composition of this particular card. The back of the postcard actually identifies the publisher of the card. It's written very small right through the middle here. Tichnor Quality Views, produced by Tichnor Brothers, Incorporated, Boston, Massachusetts, one of the largest postcard publishers in America during the 1930s through the 1950s. Out in the deep waters of the Gulf of Mexico, among the millions of different types of fish and animals that are in the ocean, there are tarpon and kingfish, which run into hundreds of pounds. Florida is a veritable fisherman's paradise. It was never sent or even written on, which could write a million stories in and of itself as to why. More than likely, it was just simply forgotten about. Maybe someone bought it when they went on their vacation, their trip down to Florida. Maybe they wanted to remember what they caught or what they wish they had caught, something to tell stories about. And approximately 80 years later, I picked it up for more than the cost in the 30s and 40s. But let's use it as a time machine for a few minutes. The fish hanging on those wooden racks connect back to a fishing culture thousands of years old. The Spanish wrote about it. Lots of other people wrote about it. An imprisoned Spaniard lived it for 17 years, and we'll talk about him a little bit later. And eventually, a tourist mailed home a postcard about all of the amazing fish that are found here in Florida. Word about Florida fishing began spreading in the mid 1800s, carried home by naval and mail ship crewmen who fished the coast on their stops and came back amazed at what they'd hauled in. After the Civil War, books about hunting and fishing became hugely popular, and a wave of new outdoor journals such as The American Sportsman, Forest and Stream, Field and Stream, and American Angler, the first magazine devoted entirely to angling, carried the legend of Florida's waters to readers across the country. National Illustrated Weeklies did the rest. Frederick Remington, yes, that Remington, the one who came here to Florida and was sent by Harper's Magazine to discover the cowboys and everything. We talked about that in an early episode, but he did not really like Florida. He didn't have an awful lot of great things to say about it, but apparently he didn't hate everything about Florida. He wrote Tarpon Fishing in Florida, The Jump, and it ran in Harper's Weekly in 1897. A tarpon hanging in midair over a tiny boat. It read less like a reporting and more like a recruitment poster. Long before any Spaniard or excited tourist looked for a fantastic fishing season set foot in Florida, the Calusa Indians dominated the entire southwest Gulf Coast, from present-day Tampa down to the Florida Keys. Unlike the Aztecs, Incas, and Mayas, the Calusas built their civilization not on agriculture, but entirely on the sea. Now, what's interesting is the Calusa capital was actually Mound Key. You can take a look at it right here. It's an island created from discarded clam and oyster shells. It's near present-day Fort Myers. The first European first-hand account of Florida's fishing culture comes from, hopefully I don't brutalize this too much, Alvaro Núñez Cabeza de Vaca. He was treasurer of the catastrophically doomed Navarrez expedition, where pretty much everyone died. On April 15th, 1528, 600 soldiers landed near Tampa Bay on the Gulf Coast of Florida. Only 4 would survive. Now, fish were so central to the survival on this coast that when the expedition later faced starvation near Apalachee Bay, the waters became literally life or death. 8 years after landing, only 4 men survived, wandering out of the wilderness naked and wretched without an ounce of gold, offering their king only news never heard before of years spent lost and naked through many and strange lands. However, for the deepest first-hand window into the Calusa fishing culture, the most important voice is Hernando de Escalante Fontaneda, arguably the greatest eyewitness in indigenous Florida. Around 1549, when Escalante was 13 years old, he and his brother were sailing from Colombia to Spain to study at the university. When their ship was wrecked on the Florida Keys, the crew and passengers were captured by the Calusa. Unfortunately, most were eventually sacrificed. Fontaneda reportedly escaped death by correctly interpreting the Calusa's commands to sing and dance for them. It's really incredible, some of the things that he wrote, and I'm going to put a link to this book down below. It's called Discovering Florida, First-Hand Contact or First Contact Narratives from Spanish Expeditions Along the Lower Gulf Coast, and it is really fantastic. I'm going to read you some of what Fontaneda wrote in a little bit. It's really incredible and some things that don't exist here in Florida anymore. In 1575, Fontaneda wrote his memoirs, and they're called Memoir of the Things, the Shore, and the Indians of Florida, to describe which none of the many persons who have coasted that country knows how to describe. It's a rather long title. The manuscript is held in the General Archives of the Indies in Spain. His memoir describes the rugged environment, flora and fauna, floodways, geography, the political structure of the Calusa chiefdom. It also provides the earliest written mention of the city of Tampa, and it was spelled Tanpa, T-A-N-P-A. And he also names 22 important Calusa villages around this particular area. This book has some really cool parts. I'm only going to read you a couple of excerpts of what he said, and see if you can pick out some things that, if you know anything about Florida, you probably have never seen here. There's a reason for that. He says, their normal food is fish and turtles and snails. Everything is fish and tuna and whales, according to what I saw while living among them. Some of these Indians eat seals, but not all, because there is a difference between old and young, and these are for elders and nobles. Later on, he says, I also say that in these freshwater rivers, there are infinite eels and very delicious and very large trout, almost as large as a man, and the eels as thick as the thigh and smaller. This particular part where he's talking about the eels and the trout being as large as a man, um, this was somewhere around Jupiter Beach, and just really incredible stuff. Now, if you picked up, you probably noticed that he mentioned seals, and this is so cool. So I started looking into seals, and I'm like, I have never seen a seal in Florida because seals don't exist in Florida anymore. The last one that was seen in Florida was by itself, and for some reason they killed it. Was in about 1952. So there were seals here. I can imagine that they probably were quite a bit of seals. So I can only imagine the animals that were here 500 years ago, and what we're missing out on seeing today. Now, there's tons of other people who reported on the animals, the fish, the type, the size of the fish, and they are, all of their names, of course, are in Spanish. So here we go. Juan Ponce de Leon, 1513 and 1521, he wrote about them. Navarez, which was the failed expedition where very few people made it out alive, 1528. Hernando de Soto, 1539. And Pedro Menendez de Villas, 1566. When Menendez made his alliance with the Calusa king in 1566, the eyewitness accounts produced by his men describe a civilization at the height of its power, fed almost entirely by the sea. An archaeological record pushes the story back far beyond the Spanish. The native people of Florida traveled the waterways and coast by canoe, facilitating communication and trade among each of the tribes and towns. And then, centuries after the last Calusa died out, in the late 1700s, a Tichnor Brothers photographer stands on a Sarasota dock around 1930 and photographs the image on this postcard. The kingfish hanging on these wooden racks are the direct descendants of the same fishery the Calusa built their entire empire upon. Cabeza de Vaca recorded the first trade of fish for goods in 1528, and Fontaneda lived inside the fishing culture for 17 years. And eventually, a 20th century tourist mailed home a penny postcard that said, Florida is a veritable fisherman's paradise. And I don't disagree. Fontaneda actually records large, what he called like rats that were in the water that they would eat. Fish as big as a man. So they were able and capable of feeding themselves and sustaining large populations with what they caught. So, with it being almost 80 years later, and Florida being advertised as a fisherman's paradise, you can check out some more of these images of amazing fishing grounds and incredible places we have all over Florida. And join next week for video number 5. See you then.